Hey, see these ray trace reflections here? Pretty nice, right? That's just normal for ray trace reflections, right? Nothing disappears when I move my camera down. They are just nice. Well, some of you might already know that I'm lying. These are not ray-traced reflections. What you are looking at were at one point a pretty common type of real-time reflections, but it all changed when the Screen Space Nation attacked.
Dude, you just want to stare at reflections all day, don't you?
No, in fact, the exact opposite is the case. I am so annoyed by SSR because SSR makes me stare at reflections. All the issues with screen space reflections draw your eyes towards them. That is the issue. I would in fact welcome more quote-unquote primitive reflections over screen space reflections. These far more traditional reflection methods usually blend in perfectly into the background. You don't even notice them. For example, I can say with 100% certainty that back in 2005, when I first played Cameo, I did not notice these reflections here. But today, they would stand out as unusually good, and that is an issue. A few generations ago, when reflections like these were in games, you barely even took note of them. They were just there. They were pleasant. They looked nice. They blended in, but you didn't stare at them, usually. You just took note of them and moved on. Now they are a novelty, and they shouldn't be. Now we have SSR, which draw the eyes towards themselves through annoying, constant artifacting and disappearing right in front of you and reappearing, and by having holes inside them. It's extremely sad to see. This video is to 100% a critique on SSR and on the ramifications its use has had on game graphics as a whole. It is about older games somehow having more tasteful looking reflections, more high fidelity reflections, and about their decline over the years, as they were replaced one by one by SSR slop. I call it SSR slop as I see SSR very similarly to generative AI, which is often referred to as AI slop. The reason why is simple. It's a quick, automated substitute for what before usually took work and consideration by a human, just like generative AI. You give a machine an image and tell it to add reflections to it. And no, this here is not AI slop. This is SSR slop. Here is what a generative AI spat out when I asked it to add reflections. So it is worse looking than AI slop even, and it constantly breaks. So say it with me, because it is indeed slop. SSR, or screen space reflections, is a type of real-time reflections that works by tracing into screen space and applying what is already rendered onto a reflective surface. The issue is the moment something leaves the screen, it also disappears from the reflections. And if something is overlapping with anything behind, it will create holes inside the reflections. The issue with this behavior is that it draws your eye to it. It looks unstable. Let me demonstrate. This is Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. SSR is currently off. Can you see any water puddles in this room? Probably not, because it is dimly lit and they are very shallow water puddles, so you wouldn't expect to see them. But if we turn SSR on, I bet you can easily count how many puddles are in the room. This is a common issue with SSR. It often reflects elements on surfaces that should not reflect those elements. Like how here in Black Ops 7, my gunfire is reflecting multiple meters in front of me, when that makes no sense. And when I said I prefer more primitive reflections, I meant it. Because if you look at these back to back, which one looks more stable and clean? And which one looks downright broken or distorted? SSR on. SSR off. In the SSR off example, you only see the cube map that was added as a fallback. A fallback is there for whenever SSR is not possible to be rendered on top, basically. The sad thing here is that the cube maps are pretty good on their own in this game, and in many games in fact, so adding SSR on top means adding graphical glitches for almost no reason other than to sell good-looking screenshots. This is what they want to sell you, and this is what you get. The very act of interacting with the interactive media breaks SSR. I will now show you why SSR makes me so angry. I will show you 4 games back to back, all of them running on various versions of CryEngine. CryEngine 1, CryEngine 2, CryEngine 3, and CryEngine 5, which is the newest version. And I wonder what you will think of SSR when we are done with these 4 games. Let's start with CryEngine 1. Crytek's first game, Far Cry. We will focus on the water here. What do you see? You see reflections that show the environment in real time. If I look down, nothing disappears. Elements in front of me do not create holes or distortions. They are just solid and relatively high fidelity, especially for 2004. So let's look what Ubisoft did when they made a spin-off on the original Xbox. So we are talking console hardware from the year 2001. Notice something? Yep, the real-time reflections are still here. This looks a bit crap because I could not capture directly from my Xbox, so I ripped the game, sent it through FTP to my PC, and now use Xemu to show it to you through emulation. And the emulator completely fucked up the water shader. So to show the water shader as it is supposed to look, here is me trying to play with one hand while recording with the other. And while my Xbox fan is screaming in pain. It's an almost 25-year-old console after all, give it some slack. But notice how you can clearly see that helicopter being reflected in the water here. Or this antenna. This dead guy. These are planar reflections. But how do planar reflections even work? And what are they? Planar reflections, aka render-to-texture reflections, work by using a second camera that captures the scene from a mirrored point of view. And whatever that camera sees gets applied to the reflective surface as a texture, hence render-to-texture. This type of reflections was very widely used. I think people forgot just how prolific they were at one point, which means it wasn't surprising to see them in our next CryEngine game.
This is actual size. I wonder if this can play Crysis. Only gamers know that joke.
Now on CryEngine 2. The water shader in this game is very wobbly. I think they could have eased off on the wobbliness a bit. And I think Crytek agrees with me, because when they brought it to console, which many thought was impossible by the way due to what an absolute graphics monster this game was, they made the water shader a bit less wobbly looking. Now running on CryEngine 3, this is the very beginning of the game, and even though it is dark, we can clearly see that the planar reflections are still there. And while recording this, I noticed something that I never noticed before, which is that Crysis has subsurface reflections. This is something I only ever saw, or at least noticed, in games like Quake 2 RTX, which is fully path traced. But it is here, on a console from 2005, running one of the most graphically demanding games of its time. This made me wonder if the CryEngine 1-driven Far Cry already did this. And by God, it in fact did. Look, even those air bubbles are reflected, which is not a given. Particle effects and transparency effects are often omitted from the reflections for performance reasons. Okay, I said we will look at CryEngine 1, 2, 3, and 5. And we have seen 1, 2, and 3. So let's look at CryEngine 5. And suddenly, this is what we are presented with. grass in front of me creates holes. Looking down makes reflections disappear. And yes, you do sit in tall grass in this game from time to time. Just as I was recording this, two guys came close and I got the jump on them because I was sitting in the grass. But even outside the grass, look at what this bridge here in front of me does, walking down this totally normal path. And look at this weird soup we are presented with as the roof of this little hut destroys the reflections. Now compare this to the pristine reflections we saw in older CryEngine games. Isn't this insane? We talked about Far Cry on CryEngine, but Ubisoft continued the series with their own Dunia engine. And with Far Cry we will demonstrate the slow invasion of SSR that started on the PS4 generation. SSR existed before the PS4 generation, but it was very rare, and during the PS4 generation it very quickly started replacing most other reflection methods. So let's see how Far Cry handles that shift from PS3 to PS4. Far Cry 2, a PS3 generation game. Planar reflections on basically every water surface. Even puddles like this one here. Far Cry 3, still PS3 generation. Still planar reflections on water. Far Cry Blood Dragon, same thing, it's a standalone add-on for Far Cry 3. Then Far Cry 4, which launched on both console generations. Still planar reflections, and on shallow or fast-moving water, they use real-time cube maps. No SSR here, just planar reflections and real-time cube maps working together. The older consoles probably saved it from SSR. Now Far Cry Primal, only on Xbox One and PS4, so we are in the SSR danger zone. But since it is in essence a Far Cry 4 spin-off, planar reflections survived. You can see the mammoths, the grass, the trees, all nicely reflected. It also uses real-time cube maps on rippling water, like Far Cry 4. They are not as precise, but let's be honest, water rarely looks like a perfect mirror anyway. And it still captures the environment nicely. You can see the trees, the rocks, the hills, even that little shadow area over there. We will come back to real-time cube maps later, but let us first move on to Far Cry 5, the first main series game that was not on PS3 and Xbox 360 anymore, only PS4 and Xbox One. So, what do you think? Will we have SSR slop? Of course we have SSR slop. It's now an Xbox One and PS4 game after all, and not a spin-off like the older games. Gotta follow the trends. And wanna see a little magic trick? I will turn this one red bridge into two bridges, just by walking backwards. Look, do you see the green bridge up here? Aren't green space reflections just magical? Of course, what really happens here is that the bridge breaks the reflections by covering the background elements and thus creating a bridge-shaped hole on a really bad greenish fallback cube map. And look how shit that cube map is. It's just a generic looking cube map with tree-like shapes that isn't even perspective corrected or anything. Just SSR slop on top of cube map slop. Remember how Far Cry 4 and Primal had real-time cube maps and planar reflections were not viable? Not even that. They didn't do even that. It's pure SSR slop. Fighting games are the worst offenders, however, because they have the weakest argument. Well, actually, they basically don't have any valid argument for using SSR, given how they are all set in small arenas with highly controlled player interactions. we would go again from old to new. Dead or Alive 3, planar reflections on water that are suitably wobbly, and on ice, which are a bit less wobbly. And this polished wooden floor. Take note how the reflections split realistically between slightly unevenly placed wooden planks, just like you would expect the reflections to warp and split in real life. One generation later, we still see reflections on water and shiny floors. You might have noticed, however, that the characters are gone from the reflections here. This was probably done to save performance, and this saved performance was then maybe used to do this. Planar reflections on transparent windows. This is what I mean when I said older methods took consideration by an actual human on how to best use the hardware, while now everything is just getting SSR slapped onto it. This Las Vegas stage is especially brilliant. Imagine replacing this with SSR slop. Look at the beautiful temple here. The torches, the pillars, the fighters, all brilliantly reflecting in the shiny polished wood. The bridge, the village, the pagoda reflecting on the river. This wet city street at night. And with this game we have a direct example of the downfall of reflections too, because it got a PS4 remake. We are in the PS4 generation now, and while we don't see SSR slop here, what we also don't see is the brilliant planar reflections of the PS3 and Xbox 360 original. No, they have all been replaced by insanely bad and not perspective corrected cube maps. And this arena here was entirely changed. My theory is that they knew their low-quality cube maps would look laughably awful in this arena, so they made the wood matte and shrunk everything down so you don't question the changes too much. And why only cube maps and not SSR slop? Well, probably the same reason. They probably knew SSR slop would look even worse in these arenas than their shitty cube maps, so they choose the lesser of two evils instead of optimizing the game for planar reflections. What is funny, however, is this here. Look how they have the real-time reflections in the preview images of the arenas, but then you play and see the sad reality unfold, of course. It's really a joke, man. The worst of the worst has to be Street Fighter 6, however. Of course, SSR is used in every reflection in the stage background, which is insane, because look how much less offensive and less broken this looks with SSR turned off. It is the worst, however, because it has an open world story mode that slaps SSR slop in your face, basically non-stop. This game also demonstrates really well what is, in my opinion, a completely inexcusable use of SSR, which is SSR on vertical surfaces. Look, I get it. Some can argue that on horizontal surfaces, SSR can work at a level that isn't complete eye cancer. I disagree, but what no one can reasonably defend is, in my opinion, SSR on vertical surfaces. It's just inexcusable. And the reason why is simple. SSR on vertical surfaces is only ever even visible if my camera is angled like this. And if my camera is angled like this, my character, or even just my gun, will always, without exception, distort the reflections, punch holes into the reflections, or create this shit. Often all three at once. This means if my camera is angled like this, I will only see the fallback, usually a cube map, so the SSR isn't adding anything. And if my camera is like this, it is always broken. Not to mention that in basically any game, you will constantly shift the camera left and right, and therefore very visibly break the reflections right in front of you. This is already awful, and this is inexcusable. We already saw many alternatives, but let's go through them. Planar reflections. You would be surprised how often they were used in the past, but back then, many didn't even think twice about them. They saw them and thought, huh, neat, and went on playing. But when I play these old games now, it is always jarring almost, like in Deus Ex, where every single mirror in the game actually works. Where massive mirror walls in the nightclub showcase how it can even have reflections inside of reflections. This one-way mirror here shows this as well. Nowadays, this would blow people's minds. And again, wanna see the downfall of real-time reflections in action? Because Deus Ex just had a remaster announced. I wonder what they did with this fully reflective floor here. Well, this. No reflections anymore. Not even SSR slop, just removed entirely. Will they remove all the planar reflections? Even the gameplay critical ones like here, that is there so you can see what the enemies are doing around the corner? They can't, right? No way. Fear had planar reflections too, on every water surface. Are dead bodies reflecting? Yup. Are particle effects reflecting? Yup. And again, this is not a given, like I said during the Far Cry examination. This was one of the games I tried to trick you with at the beginning, remember? But can you honestly say people now would not mistake these for ray-traced reflections? Oh, and here the generation of downgrades struck again, by the way. Here is the sequel, and water now looks like this. But to defend Dishonored 2 for a moment, it didn't yet completely give into the SSR slop. The game actually has really decent cube maps it uses on surfaces that are not large water bodies. So I am actually happy to see this here. And this is actually an upgrade from the first game, as that one had really bad cube maps. By the way, you even have a boss fight on these panels. And look at the little detail added to the puddles. or this lake in the first level. Nintendo was clearly proud of the power of the Gamecube, so they added planar reflection mirrors everywhere. Ghosts comb their hairs in them. They are in bathrooms. And even the entrance hall, covered with a cloth that itself is also reflecting as I am pulling it off the mirror. Nintendo also used it as a gameplay element. After clearing the room of ghosts, you notice a red thing in the mirror. You take a closer look with your Game Boy. You see it is a hidden button and press it to progress. This wasn't the first time Nintendo used reflections as a puzzle element. Look here, in the mirror reflection is a hidden painting. This right here is not a planar reflection, however. This is quote-unquote even more primitive. What you are looking at is a copy of the room and of Mario mirrored and placed behind a transparent wall. This method of real-time reflections was popular during that generation of consoles. Reflective eyes. Again, this is a transparent floor, and copies of the environment and the drivers is placed below as a mirrored version. Crash Team Racing did the exact same. As did Jet Force Gemini. Right as you start the game, you are presented with this sight. And look at this cutscene in the second level. Mirrored geometry, just to have a reflection for the water bucket that got spilled. Now compare that to a developer just clicking a toggle in Unreal Engine. I hope you are realizing why I call SSR slop compared to what developers did before. Look at this wide open space here. Even my bullets and the explosions are visible here. Another alternative are cube maps. I told you we will come back to them. There are multiple varieties of them. Simple cube maps, perspective-corrected cube maps, and real-time cube maps. Real-time cube maps work a bit like Google Street View cars. Those drive along and take a full 360 camera shot every couple of seconds as they drive along. A real-time cube map takes a 360 camera shot every frame, or every other frame, depends on the amount of GPU power you have, really. This snapshot is then applied to reflective surfaces. We can see in this example how real-time cube maps are not perfect. While you see the stuff behind me relatively well represented in the boat window here, my own character is nowhere to be found, and everything is low detail. But this reflection type is not meant to be perfect. It is meant to add perspectively accurate real-time reflections at a relatively low GPU cost, and with lots of versatility. At a glance or two, they look really damn good. Like walking down the street, seeing those neon signs reflecting in the window next to you completes the presentation. Just like the wet street below reflecting the neon sign above me. Subconsciously, it will just look right. In GTA 4, they are detailed enough to even make out the words of the LED sign here. And detailed enough to make out the animations of the neon sign that is reflecting off of this statue. And while looking at said neon sign, we see yet another one in the car window there. And we can see all the animations of this massive record sign playing out in real time over here. But GTA 4 also had planar reflections on water and on select polished surfaces. Those are also pretty detailed. And remember that at the time, this was a highly detailed open world game with groundbreaking physics and AI, yet the developers also made sure that the reflections are as detailed as possible. This is the most recent prolific example of real-time cube maps, and they look really good here on the water, don't they? You do see some pixelation when staring at them in windows, but you are not gonna play a racing game and then stand there complaining that the crane looks a bit too pixelated in the window. or that the tree here is too blurry here, but they do have one real issue, I think, which is that they only update at 30 FPS while the game runs at 60 FPS. This means they interpolate between frames, which makes them look smeary during fast motion. Running on a small handheld console at 1440p 60 FPS and being open world probably makes this sadly a necessary cutback. On a PS5 or Series X, however, with GPUs about 5 times more powerful, imagine how high quality you could make these look, and then ask yourself why no one uses them instead of SSR slop. Makes me furious. And, as I said when looking at Far Cry, it was really during the Xbox One and PS4 generation that SSR slop took over. Even most game series that at first stuck to planar reflections or cube maps switched to SSR by the end of the generation. I showed you Far Cry 5 and I showed you Dishonored 2 as examples earlier. But another one that I used to trick you into thinking it was ray tracing at the beginning of the video was Forza Horizon 2, the first Xbox One game in the Forza Horizon series. As you can see, planar reflections, even the custom car liveries get accurately depicted. By Horizon 4, they were gone. And this is how the reflections now look in Horizon 5 on Xbox Series X. A reminder that this is what water reflections inside a jungle looked like on Xbox 360 in Far Cry 2. While looking for this barn find, the trees break the reflections all around me. The elevation changes break the reflections. And flying around in drone mode, which is a neat little trick to find the barn faster, makes things even worse. From Software held onto planar reflections and cube maps at first too. Here is Dark Souls 3, you see them right at the start, and in the first boss arena. And this boss arena, in this forest, in this beautiful wide open space next to this town. But at the end of the generation, well, say hi to SSR slop, which is especially sad here, as this is one of the most stunning areas in Sekiro, and it is entirely flooded by water, and therefore entirely flooded by SSR slop. It was during this console generation where I took note of it. Before that, reflections in games were always just there, disappearing into the background, as they should in 99% of situations. But SSR disrupted this, because they break so easily, they draw your attention. When good reflections should be like good CGI. The best movie CGI is the CGI you don't even notice is there. Reflections, and frankly any graphical element in a game, should also follow that rule. It should just be there, look natural, pleasing, and stable. SSR does none of that, which is why I am so opposed to them. And it's not like other annoying graphics elements like pop-in or stair-stepping, which also draw unwanted attention to themselves. Those exist because we don't have unlimited graphics and CPU power, so they are inevitable. SSR is not inevitable. It is a deliberate choice to add fake detail. And they are not free. They cost GPU resources, meaning not having them and only having cube maps that are already there as a fallback anyway would mean better performance. So you kill performance and you add visual noise and what can only be described as graphics glitches. But ray tracing is here to save us from SSR slop, right? Yeah, well, yes. Eventually they will. But right now, far from it. Because we don't have the GPU power currently to use them reliably and high enough detail for every situation. And what that means is they get heavily downgraded to save performance. And sadly, very often, then also covered in SSR slop. This is Fortnite with ray tracing reflections turned to the maximum settings. And yup, SSR slop is still there, isn't it? And why? Because Lumen, which is Unreal Engine 5's built-in ray tracing solution, looks fucking awful and is super low quality. It is low quality because it is designed to run fast on consoles, which it also fails at, by the way. What you see here is supposed to be a mirror, and this is what you will often see in Unreal Engine 5 games. Because lumen reflections are so shit, developers make mirrors just matte instead of actually fully reflective, because they know how bad it would look otherwise. So you have the matte mirrors of shame, low quality reflections, bad performance, bad draw distance, and SSR slop on top. A game that does ray-traced reflections right is Spider-Man 2, a game I detest, but which I have to congratulate on having essentially the best reflections of any game I have ever played. They stay clear of adding SSR slop on top of their reflections, even though they are not the best quality and can remind you of N64 games if you actually stare at them up close. But again, we are not here to stare at reflections. The important thing is they blend in seamlessly into the background and just look natural at first glance. One small caveat is that they, for some reason, use SSR to add tiny details like the rims of windows, but you usually do not notice that, and SSR is not used in any other way, thankfully. For specific moments like here, they even added planar reflection mirrors, just to have a higher detail reflection as you stare directly into it here. So, Spider-Man 2 is a shining example of how to use ray tracing, but sadly it is the exception. Last minute addition to this video. I only previously played the beta version of Black Ops 7, but it turns out the full version actually has ray tracing, and it's actually really good. It even has reflections inside of reflections, which is something I have literally never seen in any game aside from RTX Remix or generally fully path-traced games. But these reflections are actually really good. They are not perfect, as you can see on this statue, it's a bit wobbly, but they are really good, and they don't use SSR as an overlay at all. Not even the slightest detail is added through SSR on top of the ray trace reflections. I am actually kinda astonished, but Black Ops 7 only has these in the multiplayer modes, and not in the story mode, which is kinda weird. But okay, let's move on, back to the video. In Unreal Engine 5 games, you can often manually disable SSR slop that gets added by creating a file called engine.ini and adding the following lines. Then save the file and write protect it, as many games will try to automatically delete it. Here I did it in Silent Hill 2. And as you can see, the obvious holes that the particles here create in the SSR are entirely gone when the SSR is turned off, and you just keep the lumen reflections without it. The same works in Silent Hill F and most UE5 games. I will now present to you a relatively modern game that didn't use SSR slop and did everything exactly like it should be done, and all without ray tracing. Hitman 2. And we will look at the first mission in the game to demonstrate what I mean. Right as we walk up to the mansion, a massive window with planar reflections on it. Here in the pool area. And now, as we break in, we see a bathroom mirror. As I walk out of the bathroom into a walk-in closet, another mirror. And into the next room, we see another massive window with planar reflections. And in fact, multiple windows next to each other. Now let's go outside onto the balcony. As we walk around the corner, again, planar reflections. And back inside, we see another massive window, in which we see the newsfeed reflecting from the living room. Walking down, another massive planar reflection. And as we look at the floor, we see that we have a perspective-corrected animated cube map. Yes, this is a cube map, and while you will notice some issues here and there, imperfections, small inconsistencies, those are quickly forgotten when thinking about the amount of polish that is on display here. Entirely without SSR slop. Cube maps, planar reflections, perspective-corrected, animated cube maps. This is the template other developers should follow. I rather see a slightly low-quality cube map when staring right at the reflection than have SSR that constantly draws my eye towards it due to its issues and due to appearing and disappearing. Because what is the alternative to having this cube map here? Well, I rather stare at a slightly low-quality cube map when staring right at the reflection than to have SSR that constantly draws my eyes towards it due to its issues and due to appearing and disappearing. Because the alternative would be having the cube map when looking directly at it, and then also having a graphics glitch disguised as a graphics feature when the camera is at an angle. Developers should abandon SSR entirely, and until full high-quality ray tracing becomes practical, the ideal approach is planar reflections on key surfaces, especially water, perspective-corrected cube maps for rooms like these, or moments like these. Real-time cube maps on large areas where planar reflections would be too demanding, and no SSR slop overlays. I mean it. The latest Need for Speed did everything right, and then added SSR on top. It had planar reflections on the street, perspective-corrected cube maps on buildings, real-time cube maps on the car, and then slapped SSR on top of the planar reflections. Why? Now I have to stare at that weird hole in my car inside the reflections every time I drive around. Older hardware achieved stable, believable reflections through deliberate design. Modern hardware is stronger, but often produces broken visuals due to convenience and automation. SSR is not innovation, it's regression. Embrace tradition, reject SSR slop.
It's all time.